Good evening.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to the November meeting for Pelagic Sailing Club. It is our final meeting of the calendar year for 2023. We have the pleasure of being here in person in Dorchester, Mass. Yet our speaker is overseas in Europe. And through the power of Zoom, he's able to present to us. John Kretschmer came to me, or I found him through a recommendation from somebody in the club. He's a multiple time author. He's got 7 books and a ton of articles. And I am looking forward to hearing some of his stories about his lifetime of sailing. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John. And John, take on over.
All right, Chris, thank you. Just to make sure everybody can hear me okay. I am sitting inside my boat in a small little place called Puerto Sherry. I'm in Cadiz, Spain. We just sailed down here literally a few days ago. We came from Lymington, England to the Cross Biscay and then down along the Iberian Peninsula and into Cadiz. We had a really, really rocky sail across Bay of Biscay, one of the stormiest passages I've had in a long time. And I've had a lot of stormy passages, but we had force 8 for 2 days and then force 9, where we actually hove to for about 14 hours and we were just getting rocked. But that is not what I'm here to talk about tonight. It's great to be here. Thank you guys for inviting me. I've had a really fantastic summer, and that's what I'm going to share with you. We did another Atlantic crossing. It was my boat Quetzal's 9th crossing, and it was my 30th. So I figured I'd do something pretty cool for that. And what we did was we retraced, in a way, the route of the Vikings. We took the northern route across the Atlantic, where we went by way of Newfoundland, Labrador, Greenland, Iceland, north about Iceland, to the Faroe Islands, and then on to Norway. And since then, we've carried on. We've sailed down to where we are now, and we're leaving tomorrow, as a matter of fact, to sail to the Canary Islands, and then back across the Atlantic in the winter. So yeah, we're busy. We log a lot of miles on our boat. This year, we're going to do about 10,000, which is pretty typical of what we do every year. It's kind of crazy. I have the coolest business in the world, though, where I have people join me for what ostensibly I call training passages. People pay to sign aboard, and then we have these great adventures. And this whole summer has been an adventure like that, where I've had crew join me. And it's a really cool business because the majority of the people have sailed with me many times and are great friends. So it's nice to be able to make money from your friends, and also to have really trusted shipmates come aboard. On one of the legs, I had 3 guys that had crossed the Atlantic with me previously. So they know the boat, they know me. So yeah, it's a business, but it's a really good one. It's more of sharing adventure than it is actual training. I'm not sure who learns more from these passages, me or the crew. But this summer was cool. So I'm going to start now. What I was thinking about is I'm going to share the summer's voyages. We've got some fantastic pictures, and describe the voyage. It was a 4,000-mile odyssey from Lunenburg, Nova Scotia to Bergen, Norway. And then afterwards, I've been at this gig my whole life. I'm leaving tomorrow for a 1,000-mile passage. It's just what I do. And so I'm open for questions. It's 1 o'clock-ish here in Spain. So I might try to cut it a little shorter than normal, just so I can get some sleep before we push off. But anyway, it's nice to be here. So I'm going to share the screen right now. And let's do this one, I think. There we go. So yeah, I'm calling it In the Wake of the Vikings. The reason I chose that title, it's going to be a big Cruising World feature coming up in a few months. And in fact, it was a retracing of kind of the classic Viking routes, their voyages to the New World, literally 1,200 years ago and 500 years before Columbus. So you can see there's some ice in our life. We had a lot of ice, and it's really interesting how you kind of come to deal with it. At first, it's really stressful. After a while, it's just an annoyance, and then sometimes it's really stressful again. But this shows the route. You all recognize the Navionics chart there. We started in Lunenburg. We actually started in St. Martin in May, and we sailed to Bermuda, and then Bermuda to Lunenburg, up to Newfoundland by way of a really cool landfall. It's kind of up your way, called Sable Island. I'm not sure if any of you know about it, but it's a Canadian national park. It's a little crescent of sand that is known as the graveyard of ships. It's 90 miles south of the Canso Channel, and it's rimmed by 350 shipwrecks that they know about, and there are plenty more, I'm sure, that they don't. And then we went from there up to Newfoundland, which I've been to many times. It's one of my very favorite places. And then up the Labrador coast a ways, and then across the Lab Sea and the Davis Strait to Greenland, and then across the Imminger Sea to Iceland, and then north about Iceland so that we could go above the Arctic Circle, down to the Faroes. We tried to get to the Shetlands, but we're just beat away, and finally made landfall in Norway. So it was a really cool being the operative word. At times it was freezing cold, but it was a great adventure, and the first time I'd ever made this northern crossing. So it was fun for me to go to lots of new places. So that's Quetzal. She glided into Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. I don't know if any of you've been there. It's just down the road. It's downwind from where you guys are right now. It's one of my favorite places in the world. I always joke that Lunenburg is it's the gateway. It's almost like my gateway drug. It's where all my northern voyages seem to begin. I have terrific friends there. We've been there many, many times over the years, and we came in style on a nice early June day, flying our pink spinnaker that my wife designed. Quetzal is a great sailing boat. Well, here's Lunenburg. I can't recommend a place more highly. I heard you talking about there's a Maine schooner trip next summer. It's just, I think from Boston to Lunenburg is 300 miles or a little bit less. And it's a slog getting home, but it's really nice sailing there. And it's a magical place. It's a fishing town, and it's kind of touristy in some ways, but it's just got incredible nautical acumen. There are people there that just walk up to your boat and they can just tell by the lines that she's seaworthy, and they'll talk about the construction of your new hard dodger. And anyway, it's a great place in the world. Quetzal's been going there for a long time. We first sailed up there in 2003. So I've owned the boat for 21 years. This was a 2005. You can see she's a cutter rig, Kaufman 47. It's a boat I have a crazy amount of love for. My wife's a beautiful woman, and she jokes that I never look at her the way I look at the boat. She might be right, but it's a lovely craft, and she just took a whack a couple of weeks ago. I mean, you forget what 40 knots sustained and 9-meter seas are like. That's what Windy was calling in the Biscay, and it's hard work, and she stands up to it, and she's always seems to pull me through. I don't know exactly how many miles we've sailed her, but we have rarely logged, well, we've never logged less than 5,000 in a year, and often more than 10. So it's one of those numbers now I don't really want to add up because it's crazy. It's somewhere around 200,000 miles. And to put that in perspective, a lively, far-flung trade wind circumnavigation is about 30. So now numbers just kind of get boring after a while, but she's a remarkable boat, and we have big voyages ahead. So after Lunenburg, our first landfall was Sable Island. I don't know if that rings a bell with any of you. It's a kind of, for Canadians, it stirs them. It's a place where they all know about, and getting to Sable is kind of a dream for Canadian mariners. If you go due south of where Nova Scotia and Cape Breton meet, that's Sable Island, about 100 miles. And it's right essentially where the Grand Banks give way into deeper water. It's a little sliver of sand, and it's hard to go there. You have to get a permit, and the Canadians are not that generous about giving them out. I had a great friend of mine from Lunenburg who's well connected, and we managed to get the landing permit, so we had to go. This shows you the documented wrecks around Sable. There's a lot of them there, and they're hard to find because the sand just swallows them up, as you'll see here in a second. But yeah, so you approach it cautiously. The day we approached was absolutely gorgeous. And it's kind of funny though, it's hard to get ashore. There are no harbors, and there's a stealthy wave break when you come in your dinghy. So we were, in the dinghy, 4 of us, we were, feeling like we were Marines storming the beach. We picked a nice open spot, stormed in, and the dinghy hit the sand, and we struggled to get out, and a wave plopped into the dinghy and soaked us. And we realized we were 4 old guys in a dinghy, not really Marines storming a beach, but we made it ashore onto Sable, and it's a pretty amazing place. It's got low dunes, this marram grass kind of holds it all together, but it's famous for the shipwrecks and for the wild horses. There are 500 wild horses that have survived since the 1700s on Sable. And now they're a completely unique breed. They're the Sable Island horses. And they're tough as nails. They withstand the brutal winters of the North Atlantic on this tiny windswept island, and their population numbers are stable. And it's a national park now, and Canada has a hands-off policy. We witnessed a stallion there. You can actually see him limping, who was not going to be long for the world. And one of our crew was a veterinarian and said, we could fix this in a heartbeat, but it's Sable beats to the nature's rhythm, and it's a very kind of quintessential Canadian thing. They don't have any glaring structures there, and you walk around, and it's a really cool place. We were the first boat to be there in June, and I was talking to my friend Alan. This year, only 4 boats made it to Sable. You really need ideal conditions to get out there. But just walking around the island is amazing. There's lots of evidence of ships that didn't do very well there. And in fact, the last shipwreck on Sable was in 1999, when this J41, I believe it is, it's called Merrimack, hit the sandbar. And it's an interesting story. It's tragic. No lives were lost. The crew was rescued. They literally walked ashore. But within 6 weeks, there wasn't a trace of the boat left. The sand had just swallowed it up. So anyway, we pressed on from Sable, and we cut our voyage short because a really strong wind was coming. And it's a long sail from Sable up to St. John's, Newfoundland. It's 400 miles. And it's interesting because you go in and off of these offshore banks, so the sea state is often unsettled. We had strong winds for sure. Quetzal is really well made for heavy weather sailing. We've added that hard dodger. We've got this crazy full enclosure that really keeps us warm and dry. And we press on. But to give you an idea how windy it was, we had 3 reefs in the main and the staysail, and we sailed 400 miles in just over 2.5 days. It was a beautiful reach for a change. Part of the trouble with our Biscay bash of a few weeks ago is the winds were dead on the nose. Everything about sailing, every story you tell, all the perspectives about heavy weather are totally focused on point of sail. 30 knots upwind sustain is hell. 30 knots on a reach can be glorious. So anyway, we zoomed up to St. John's. I think this is a little video I might play. I don't know if it's jerky for you guys. In classic cruiser mode here in Spain, the Wi-Fi in the marina, which had been absolutely flawless, failed today. So I'm on my hotspot. So I hope everybody can see this. Anyway, we worked our way up the coast of Newfoundland. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. It was starkly beautiful and one of my all-time favorite places. Newfoundlanders are a unique breed. Newfoundland has its own time zone. It's a half an hour east of Atlantic time zone, and it should be because it's way to the east. It straddles longitude 53, I think. Due south of Newfoundland takes you down to Brazil. So it's way out to the east, and It's closer from St. John's, Newfoundland to Galway, Ireland than it is to Toronto. But I've been there many times, circumnavigated a couple times. It's a huge island. The island's bigger than Ireland, to put it in perspective. But we had a mission. We made our way up to Lonsa Meadows. So Lonsa Meadows is on the very top of the Newfoundland coast. It's the only place in the New World where there are documented Viking ruins. It's a beautiful site, another Parks Canada site, and they really handle it nicely. There's a great exhibitor center or exhibition center, and then the site itself is very humble, low slung, rainy and misty, and you really get an appreciation for these guys and women who sailed in boats of usually less than 60 feet. Even their big voyaging Nords, they were low freeboard, definitely sailing boats. But crossing the ocean to this sort of shallow rocky harbor was a real test in 1000 CE. That's what the site looks like. That
Did we lose John? John, I think we're not hearing you.
is somebody
Yeah, I think John's breaking up a little bit.
wanting some political contributions.
There we go.
John, you may have to turn off your
We
video.
lost him completely. So we'll hold on and hopefully he jumps back on for the
Okay.
remainder of this, but hey, there we go.
All right, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I thought I had my phone turned off, but then you guys can't hear me. So we'll get back into action here.
Yeah, we lost about the last minute. You just shown the
All
there
right.
you go.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Anyway, I don't know, it's totally an accessible wilderness, especially for you guys in the Northeast. From Lunenburg or Halifax around the corner to St. John's is about 450 miles. And that's missing the best part of Newfoundland. The south coast is known as the Fjord Coast, and it's absolutely spectacular. To plan a summer's circumnavigation of Newfoundland is just a real adventure, completely doable, and a wonderful place. It's funny, when we tied up here, going back to the slide there, we tied up in this little bay. Oh, you can't really see it on this chart. It's about a mile walk from the site. And we came in, and I had been there before, and these two Newfoundland fishermen helped us tie up. And it was just nasty out. One thing about the weather up there, in June and early July, it's still pretty cold, and it's raining, and these guys help us tie up. They don't seem to mind. And I just make inquiries about walking over to the site because we're anxious to get over there. And one of the guys, Clive, says, "Can't walk there from here." And I know you can walk there because it's a mile away. And I did it, 5 years before that. And he said, "Nope, can't do it. But you can take Rabbit's car." And he says, "Keys are on the dash. It's too wet to walk, boys. Drive over there." And that's just typical Newfoundland hospitality. People just give you their cars. He gave us the car the next morning to top off our jerry cans because there's no fuel docks in that part of the world. It's a great place. Anyway, if you get a chance to go there, you should really consider it. So that's the site, Lonsa Meadows. That's the kind of the exhibitor center. Shows you kind of the Viking routes, and it also shows exactly what we were doing. We didn't go as far up the Lab Coast as Leif Erikson is thought to have gone or come south on, but we basically did follow the route. So we went from Lonsa Meadows up to a place called Battle Harbor, and then on up the Labrador coast to Hawk Island. Battle Harbor is another beautiful Canadian site. It's very stark. I mean, the Lab Coast you really feel like you're in the wilderness, especially as you go north from here. This has been restored by a private trust, and it's a really cool place. And Battle Harbor is weirdly steeped in history. It's the very spot that Robert Peary, when he came back to the world, proclaimed from here that he had reached the North Pole, because Marconi had raised one of his towers here in 1904, and he was able to broadcast news that he'd reached the pole. History hasn't really treated Peary well, and many refute the fact that he actually made it to the pole. When you look at his dead reckoning and his celestial navigation, it takes a real leap of faith to think that he and Henson actually covered the miles they did. It would have been the most heroic Arctic traveling of all time. But anyway, it became a real pissing match in the world, and National Geographic, and a very nationalistic thing. And even Amundsen, the great Norwegian, supported Peary's claim. So we've always known of him as the discoverer of the North Pole. And he broadcast that right here from Battle Harbor. It's a place where it's the geography of Labrador is windswept, not many trees, mossy, and windy for sure. So we left Battle Harbor and sailed north, and we saw our first iceberg, and we were really excited because I'd been looking at the ice reports every day, and there should have been ice around, and we hadn't seen any. So we sailed right up to this thing, and I used my sextant to measure its altitude and its width, and there's easy calculations to make because I knew our distance away by the radar. And I calculated it at about 200 feet high and about 350 feet wide. So it's a pretty big chunk of ice, sort of cast away from a distant Greenland glacier. And we were just mesmerized by it. Little did we know that a week later, we'd have post-traumatic stress syndrome from so much ice and pushing our way through fields of ice. But at the moment, the first iceberg is kind of like well, I better not go down that road, but it's a memorable one for sure. So we anchored in this crazy, beautiful place. I mean, beautiful by my standards. You guys know this. You're New Englanders, how this looks. This is called Hawk Island, and this is Eagle Cove. And it's a place where you could spend a lot of time at anchor. We found mussels there. Two of the guys literally found a mussel bed in about 4 feet of water, and they bravely took their pants off and tied them into little baskets and filled them with hundreds of mussels. Antonio joined us from Lisbon. It's interesting. I had crew from Mexico, Hong Kong, Singapore, Portugal. Lots all over the world. People joined me for this expedition. It's pretty cool. Anyway, that's a great harbor. And from there, we carried on for Greenland. And we left, there was a deep low pressure. So in this part of the world, the low pressures just come ripping from west to east, and they tend to go southwest and northeast, and especially in the summer. And you just watch one after another. So we delayed leaving one day because the winds were like 55 knots. But we wanted to catch the back end of that low so we could get across with favorable winds. So the day we left Battle Harbor, it was one of those days where the winds were maybe 25, 30 knots. They were from the west, so it was a great reach, but the seas were from every single direction. There would just be waves that would break right over the boat, and you're just like, where is that coming from? It was a very rugged 24 hours. We spent most of the time with 3 reefs in the main, and the staysail, and just a tiny bit of jib of headsail to kind of act like a turbocharger to give us some oomph. It's amazing how much of this summer we've had 3 reefs in the main. But we made it across, and we spied the incredible, beautiful coast of Southwest Greenland. Greenland is a whole nother universe, and it's really cool to go there in your own boat. We saw some tourists. We saw one of those expedition style cruise ships. But from the time we left Newfoundland to the time we got to Iceland, we saw 4 sailboats. So it's the real thing. It's wilderness. And then suddenly you realize you got to get through all this. So this is a typical day in Greenland. So we were headed to Kortok, which is the former Julianhab, the capital of Southwest Greenland, the second biggest city in Greenland with 3,000 people. And you realize that little sea ice right there can absolutely stop you in its tracks. So there are 3 kinds of icebergs. There are basically large bergs, and after a while you realize they're the best. You see them on radar, they're easy to go around. Then you have bergy bits, which are smaller icebergs. What we're looking at there are bergy bits in the background. And in the, just before that, you have growlers, which are less than a meter above the water, can still weigh 100 to somewhere between 100 to 1,000 tons, because the tip of the iceberg is just the tip of the iceberg, as they say. And you can't see them until you smack into them, and they are nerve-wracking. So here's an example of Storus, which is sea ice, and some growlers, and you just get used to navigating around it for sure and picking your way through it. You can see that the coast of Greenland is just, it's eerie beautiful. And then every now and then we come across just magical icebergs. And Levi, one of our crew from Mexico, turned out to just be an amazing drone pilot. And not only did the drone give us great photographs, but it helped us see ways to get through the ice. It's actually kind of a navigational tool in today's world. This one is fractured and is going to fall at any moment. It's interesting, almost all the ice in southwest Greenland, excuse me, has originated in northeast Greenland and has come down the east coast around Cape Farewell and then gets stuck and runs aground here on the southwest coast. And all the icebergs you see in Newfoundland and Labrador just follow that exact same Viking route. The currents just literally track south on East Greenland, north on West Greenland. They work their way over to Baffin Island, and then the Labrador current takes them all the way down to Newfoundland and sometimes further south. So they make a long journey, and they can be thousands of years old. They've all come off glaciers. The sea ice that I showed you before forms from the water freezing, but these bergs have made a long voyage. So in Greenland, you don't tie up at marinas, you don't pick up moorings, you lay along commercial docks. You need really robust fenders, long lines, because they're pretty big tides, but mostly because you have no idea what you're going to tie up to, and you have to be ready to move, because you never just kind of tie up and start waltzing ashore. This dock we're tied up to was filled, and we moved across the harbor to a fishing dock a few hours later. So it's a little unsettling because you make a voyage and you just kind of want to stretch your legs a little bit, but you have to kind of be on the lookout for whenever a ship comes in to move, but it's worth it. So then we went south from Kortetag down to Nanutiluk, and then we entered the most beautiful place I've ever sailed, and I've been sailing in a lot of beautiful places. This is called Prince Christian Sund. It's a narrow 70-mile waterway north of Cape Farewell that gives you a protected passage from West Greenland to East Greenland. It's really, it's protected if you can get in. There's a sea ice on both ends. We got lucky on the west side, but we were worried we weren't going to get out. But luckily, a huge storm came, which we rode out in a picture-perfect anchorage. And then that storm blew all the ice away, so we could get out a few days later. But you can just see it's spectacularly beautiful. The mountains just explode out of the water. It was eerie, beautifully calm the day we did most of the transit. These are 6,000-foot mountains that just rise up. We use the ice poles quite a bit. You can see the guys on the bow there. They're pushing small growlers out of the way. They were essential to us because you would just come across times where there was just no apparent way through, but you could push your way through a little bit. And it's pretty amazing how tough fiberglass hulls are. And then you can see they're going to move that growler. Actually, that might have been a video. No, it's not. But here's a chart of what the Prince Christian Sound looks like. You enter down in Nanutiluk. There's some incredibly beautiful bays. We anchored in this little cove. I guess I can't really show. Yeah, there we go. In this little cove right here. We picked our way through sea ice here, got in. This is the start to the Sound. We had this big storm coming. We crept by this rock, and I mean crept. It was a rock that was, 80 feet tall, and you could touch it as we went by. But the water was deep, deep next to it, and we got into this little cove. Worked hard to get the anchor set. We have a great spade anchor, an 80-pound spade, and then slept pretty well. It was pretty amazing. But as you go through the zone, this is just, you kind of dodge around little bergy bits like this. We anchored right off a couple of glaciers. It's pretty cool because you can hear them calving. You can just literally hear them go as a little bit falls in. You always knew when you were coming to a glacier because the ice downstream and we were headed upstream was suddenly a lot more intense. But this is amazing ice, and the guys picked up a few, 4-foot chunks of ice that provided some nice ice for our cocktails from there to Iceland, the next leg. When you take ice from an iceberg and drop it in your gin and tonic, it just sizzles. It's pretty nice. That was kind of our route down through Southwest Greenland. It's a real adventure, but it's completely doable. I was following the ice reports. I was nervous. I was really paying attention, but you can do it in just about any boat if you're prudent. And we were pushing a little early in the season. We went through in July because I had a long way to go. August is definitely, it's open almost all the years, especially nowadays. In fact, ironically enough, climate change has made the Prince Christian Sound a little trickier because the ice off eastern Greenland is melting to such a degree that it kind of clogs up the sound, whereas before it didn't. There are actually more icebergs, less actual, permafrost on Greenland itself, but so it's completely navigable. This most stressful night of the trip, however, was when we left the east end of Prince Christian Sound. So there's 3 things in high latitude sailing that you're cautious around or wary of. 1 is strong winds, 2 is there's a lot of fog, and 3, there's ice. If you have 2 of the 3, you can pretty much work your way through it. When we left the Prince Christian Sound, we had gale force winds, complete fog, and ice everywhere. And we had to get 50 miles offshore to get beyond the ice. And it was a very stressful night. We tried to get out soon, but we had to pick our way through ice. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we got out. And even though there's loads of daylight up there, which is beautiful, we still had a bow watch all night long with the radar, getting douched last to the bow pulpit. It was a tough night, but we were really happy to get beyond the ice. And then we ended up with no wind at all. And we motored a lot of the way up to Iceland. It's 650 miles from where we left the Sound up to Reykjavik. We actually went into a little town called Hafnarfjord, where the Icelandic Keelboat Association is, and they hosted Quetzal and treated us royally. We had a really nice time. I took a little break. My wife, daughter, and her fiance flew in to join us, and we drove all around Iceland by car before we were getting ready to sail. I'm sure some of you have been there. It's a really intriguing, awesome, natural, raw place. It's a land of fire and ice for sure. And while we were there, they had a pretty serious eruption. And like idiots, my daughter, fiance, and I hiked 6 miles over a very rough trail right up to the edge of the lava field to see it, and then 6 miles back. And it is incredible to see Earth in its creative mode, though. I gave a little chat at the Icelandic Keelboat Association because they were so nice to us. Some really diehard sailors up that way for sure. It is not easy going. And then we pressed on for the next leg, where we went to the north of Iceland and headed for Norway. Quetzal, there's a good picture of Quetzal. One of our friends, Friedrich, a photographer, in fact, his former Hollywood photographer who lives in Hafnarfjord, went out in the rib and took these. We actually have tons of sail up for the summer. We've got a big chunk of head sail up and only 1 or 2 reefs in the main. So our route, you can see starting on the left there, we actually went back to the west a little bit to get around what are called the West Fjords, which are spectacularly beautiful. And then around the north shore of Iceland, and then down to the Faroes. We tried to get to the Shetlands and didn't make it. So great crew for this leg. Chris from originally from West Virginia, but now from North Carolina, has been on a lot of trips with me. Good steady hand. We rounded what's called Cape Horn, Cap Horn of Iceland, which took a picture of this because it was at Cape Horn many years ago in 1984 where I kind of made my mark as a sailor. We We sailed from New York to San Francisco around the Horn in a 32-foot boat. Crazy when I think back at it. And we became at that point, the first Americans to ever double the Horn to windward in a sailboat, in a yacht. Obviously, commercial ships did it all the time, but it was an epic voyage. And what's really cool is that next summer, I'm on this I'm calling it the big one. It's a tribute to the Atlantic. I've been sailing the Atlantic for so long. We're going to do the entire thing. And next summer, I'll be in, next winter in the Northern Hemisphere, summer in the Southern Hemisphere. We'll be rounding the Horn again. It'll be 40 years almost to the day after I did it the first time. And that's a lot of years, boy. But anyway, it was cool to go around. So we had survival suits on board, and each leg, I had everybody practice getting in them. I had a long talk with the skipper of the Blue Nose schooner when I was in Lunenburg, and he basically said, you might as well throw that life raft away if you don't have survival suits, because you're not going to survive in that cold of water in a life raft. So I made sure that we had survival suits, and we all practiced getting in them. It's really tricky getting in those things, and you have to kind of help each other. But we managed to do it in under 2 minutes. So we would literally have one crew go down below, toss them into the cockpit. We'd all get into them, and then, kind of laugh and joke around. But it was serious business. The safety briefings were very, very serious on each leg of this trip. Falling overboard was an extremely bad idea in water that cold. Well, you guys are familiar with cold water sailing. Up there, it's a whole new level. We went to a place called Islafjord, which is kind of like the staging point for adventurers in Iceland. All sorts of cool aluminum boats there. It's all looked a little out of place with their nice fiberglass hull. But we had made it through, and a lot of boats were still waiting to go to Greenland. So we were kind of the local heroes while we were there. And then we went north about Iceland, and the Arctic Circle is at 6633.3. So you can see we had just nudged above it on our chart plotter. And we went to this little island called Grimsay. And Grimsay is known as the island on the Arctic Circle. There are 30 residents, about 100,000 puffins, and maybe 1 million really pissed off Arctic terns that dive bomb you every time you go anywhere. But they have a monument out in the north end of Grimsay that marks the current position of the Arctic Circle. Because the magnetic North Pole is always shifting around, the actual position of the Arctic Circle is changing a little bit. So they made the monument this huge concrete round barrier so that they could push it and roll it instead of having to move some kind of square one as the circle moves in direction. It's going a little further north each year. Pretty soon it's going to be off of Grimsay, and then they're going to have to come up with a new slogan. It's funny at first, you see a puffin and you creep around like, it's amazing, and you get down like a National Geo photographer and take photos. And after a while, you've seen like 1,000 of them, you're kind of booting them out of the way. Interestingly enough, that night, a local guy came aboard and we had a nice chat, and he tried to get me to smuggle some frozen puffin to the Faroe Islands, because apparently they're a delicacy in the Faroes, but illegal to kill them there. So I thought I might get in trouble, though, if I get caught smuggling puffins. It could be bad for my image. So anyway, we turned him down. But we had a really strong wind when we left Grimsay and had a fantastic sail. And then as we approached the Faroes, the world went quiet again. It's kind of northern sailing, lots of wind and no wind, and very precious few, just great reaching days. We also had to wait here. The tidal currents in the Faroe Islands are legendary. There are some that are 10 knots. The channel we were going to go through, we were waiting for a 4 to 5 knot current turn our way. So we hove to or just drifted around for about 4 hours until we could enter the Faroes. They are a misty, brooding, beautiful group of islands. Absolutely lovely. A place I would like to spend a lot more time. We went to Tórshavn, which is the capital, and it's a beautiful place. Those red buildings are the government buildings, and you can see they have sod roofs. It's a lovely little spot, very Danish. and as is Greenland. It's interesting. Greenland is the largest island in the world by a long shot. It has 53,000 people, and it was different than I thought. There wasn't the native Greenlanders were doing very well, prosperous, driving nice vehicles, super friendly and helpful. And Denmark supports Greenland to a crazy degree, to the tune of €1 billion a year for 53,000 people. And they had a referendum like in 2018 whether Greenland wanted to be independent of Denmark, and they voted 90% yes. They said, well, wait, before we do this, the second question is, are you willing to have your lifestyle change if you become independent? And they voted 90% no. So they decided to stay very, very much within the Danish sphere. And the Faroes are too, but really beautiful place. So we left the Faroes and it was just blowing and honking. We could not make our way to the Shetlands. The first day we had great sailing, this nice reach, and we took some beautiful celestial sights, including we took a lunar where you measure the angular distance between the moon. In this case, we used Jupiter to check your chronometer. That was Joshua Slocum's trick. We always joked about his $2 chronometer, but if you can take a lunar, there can only be an angular distance between two celestial bodies at any given second. So when you know that, you can check your clock. But generally it was cloudy. There wasn't a lot of celestial navigation. It was a good time to have GPS. But then we couldn't make it to the Shetlands. We just kept pounding and pounding our way until finally the rocky main-like coast of Norway loomed into view, and we made landfall on Fiji Island, and it was kind of cool. It was the 30th Atlantic crossing for me and my stalwart boat's 9th crossing, and we're pressed on a long way from there already, from where I'm talking to you tonight. But that was our program. So yeah, it was a really cool summer, and it's nice for me to have some new adventures to talk about. I've told a lot of sea stories over the years, but on that note, I will open it up to you guys to have any questions or any discussion about it. So it was a fun summer for sure. So.
So I have a question, John. This is Alex Collier. How
Hi,
do you
Alex.
fund these trips?
So I fund them because the people that come aboard pay. So they are technically, basically, Alex, for the last 25 years, I've run what I call offshore training passages. And so, as I was explaining earlier, they're more like shared adventures. And I have many people sail with. I've had one guy sail with me 17 times on different trips. And, we always joke, Don could have bought a really nice boat for the amount of money he's paid me. But so they're paying crew, but I know almost all of them. And for this particular voyage, I cherry picked everybody to be aboard it. So yeah, so I actually make money doing this, and I have great crew at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent talk. Thanks so much, John. It's been fascinating.
Oh, my pleasure. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's nice to see you guys. And I think this is cool that clubs like the Pelagic Sailing Club are in business doing what they do, because it's such an amazing thing. I've been the lucky one. I've managed to sail the oceans my whole life. And for me, at this stage of my life, I'm 64 this year, the oasis that the sea is, I'm more aware of it than ever, and more. It's funny, after all these years, I think I appreciate it more than ever. We have an interesting drama awaiting us, because I'm not sure if you guys have heard about the orca issues here in Spain and Portugal, and France. But there's a kind of a marauding pod of local resident orcas that have really been messing with sailboats. And it's serious. Yeah, there have been 300 incidences now. There have been over 500 observations, 300 incidences, and more than 200 boats, I think Nathan told me, have had some type of rudder damage. So it's really bizarre. It forces you into a strange emotional space because you love the sea. You certainly love whales, and orcas in particular are, this mammal to mammal connection you have, and yet they have just been coming alongside boats and thumping them and then starting to play with the rudder and disabling the rudder. So we were on high alert sailing last week around from La Coruña, which is at Cape Finisterre, the northern part of Spain, around the Portuguese coast and over to where we are now, not too far from Gibraltar. And we stayed way offshore, and we stayed right in the shipping lanes, which probably annoyed the hell out of the ships, but it was thinking that maybe the orcas wouldn't want to come out there. But tomorrow when we leave, we've got about 80 miles till we get off this continental shelf again. So we'll be on high alert for orcas and hope to scare them away by making a lot of noise and wishing them no harm. But it seems to me it's odd they pick sailboats to hassle, because we're like their natural friends. We're not out to harm anybody. But anyway, yeah, so it's just one more level of where ocean sailing always has some tricks up its sleeve.
That
John.
was actually going to be my question for you. As far as what were you doing? But I wanted to leave that for after we were talking about the Northern Passage. But so, do you feel that moving into the shipping lanes has been kind of the safer option?
Jack, I'm not really sure. I studied, and my friend Nathan Zar, who is in this he's kind of in a way my protege. He's in the same business that I am, and he's a wonderful guy. He's really studied it. And when you look carefully at all the reports, the vast majority, I'm not sure the percentage, but vast of the incidences seem to occur in shallower water, or at least water where you're on the continental shelf. The only place that hasn't been true is up in Biscay, where some of the attacks, and the environmentalists hate the word attack, but the yachts have just started using it now because they're pretty serious incidences where your rudder just gets destroyed. And things kind of reached a new level on November 1st, where they repeatedly attacked this 43-foot Jeannot until they busted the rudder off and the boat sank. And the 4 crew were picked up by another sailboat not too far away. And that just really kind of brought the whole orca thing to a new level. So studying all of that, it seemed like if we just got offshore and stayed in, more than 1,000 meters, stayed in the shipping lanes, because it seems like, they're noise sensitive, and there's so much shipping on this coast. We were never, it's stressful, but we were never without 5 ships around us and sometimes 20 ships around. But truthfully, with radar and AIS, and we were going the same direction, it isn't all that terrible, and it seemed to work. But I don't know, honestly, if is a real strategy or not, but it worked for us. And tomorrow, we're going to just try to get offshore as fast as possible.
John, I have 2 questions. How do you make noise, and can you describe your boat a little bit more?
Sure. So some people are actually carrying firecrackers now, like the fishermen do. That seems a little severe. You can make noise with horns. You can make noise with the whisker pole by getting it over the side and bashing it with a winch handle or something to make a metallic noise. We've never actually, had an encounter, so we don't really know yet. But I'm really hoping not to. Quetzal's a cool boat. She was designed by Mike Kaufman. A boat that's similar, some of you might know, is the Sky 51. Kaufman and Ladd. She was kind of as they used to joke, a poor man's swan. She looks a lot like a Swan 47. And in fact, when they first introduced the boat, they got sued by Swan because their advertising slogan was the Taiwan Swan. And she looks way different than when I bought her. She was a symphony of teak. She was a Burmese forest of teak. There was teak on the side decks, the coach roof, everywhere. And at about age 30 in her life, it was just time for the teak to go away, and it was a massive project. And we've done so many things on her. It's crazy. There's a there's an old philosophical theory about Theseus's ship. Theseus was the founder of Athens, and they took his ship and they put it in the center square in Athens in 600 BC or whatever. And it was an important thing for the city, and they kept restoring it as it rotted away. And by the time Aristotle came around 300 years later, he said, there's nothing that Theseus would even recognize about this ship anymore. And that's kind of how Quetzal is. We've done so many changes to her. But she's cutter rigged, deep draft, draws 7 feet, very good sailing boat, terrible motoring boat. We have a brand new Beta 60 in there that I love, but we are a slow motoring boat, but we often punch out 8, 9, even 10 knots if we can do a little bit of reaching. So yeah, she's a cool boat. I really love her. And, one of my philosophies about sailing offshore is to understand what's important and what isn't. And I always have prioritized the sailing. We always have newish, if not new sails, and I've done a bunch of talks and webinars on heavy weather sailing. And there's all these strategies. My background is I did some adventures as a young guy. Then I spent 20 years delivering boats all over the world, all kinds of boats, then 20 years doing this. And the thing that matters in heavy weather is having good sails. It is the single most important safety feature. As we hove to, just the buffering and battering that your sails take, if they can't take that, you're going to blow them out, and then suddenly all bets are off, and that strategy's out the window. So we have really fresh sails all the time on the boat. I change the standing rigging every 7 years. We really keep ahead of that sort of stuff. Sometimes the cosmetics might not be as great as they should be, although my wife Taji has changed that a lot. We call it the Tajification of Quetzal now that she's aboard more. But she's a cool boat for sure.
What do you have for watches?
So this next trip, we have 4 people coming, so there'll be 5 of us aboard. We typically do, the crew will be 2, will be double watches, and I'll be solo. We'll be 3 on, 6 off. And watches are 8 to 11, 11 to 2, 2 to 5, and then whoever was on that first 8 to 11 watch is up again. It's interesting. Taji and I have done a lot of sailing, just the 2 of us. And Nathan just came and helped me sail from A Coruña around over to here. And we use a different 2-person watch system that I really like. So I'm a very good sleeper. I can lay my head down and just bam, I'm out. And even after all these years, I'm really good at that. And so typically the way Taji and I do it is I'll make dinner, get the boat, get washed up, boat happy, and about 8 o'clock, I hit the sack. And then she stays awake as late as she can, depending on the weather and how she's feeling. She always makes it till midnight, maybe even 1, sometimes later, and then wakes me up. And then I stay up the rest of the night. I make a pot of coffee, and I like that. And she definitely likes it better than the 3 on, 3 off, 4 on, 4 off system. So we've managed, and Nathan and I just did the same thing. It's critical that you get some sleep, but it's another thing. It's interesting because I have different crews sailing with me all the time, and people say, "Oh, you must always sleep with one ear open," and nothing could be further from the truth. Because one of the things I've learned is that sleep is you have to bank it when you can, because when the conditions are crappy, it's hard to sleep. And so I have a lot of confidence in my crew. Alex, you asked about how do I fund this thing. The thing, I think what's made this work for me is the great discovery of my business has been that everybody who comes aboard is a pretty damn good crew member, whether they're great sailors or not. They all have something to offer. And what I've realized is they don't need me bossing them around. They need me to figure out what their strength is and to encourage it. And people are into it. I mean, everybody who comes on, sometimes we screw up, but everybody who comes aboard is looking to do their best. It sounds corny, kind of football coachy, but it really is true. And that has allowed me to have this cool business and sail all over the world at the same time. So it's been the discovery. You don't have to be the man, and you don't have to have all these stupid rules on your boat. There's a lot of room for adapting to different people and still sailing safe and swiftly. So,
I have a question. Do you have a storm trysail? And if so, how do you sheet it?
you know, I don't, and I did for years on other boats. And we had one on Gigi, the boat we took around the Horn, and I love the idea of it. But I could never figure out how to sheet it very well. So, you know, and when we used it on Gigi, what was interesting, because the track goes as an alternate, a separate track, right? And it only works on one tack, because otherwise it lays right across the mast and chafes like crazy. So it seems like a super cool idea to have this separate track. But I think if you actually use it in strong winds and you're on the wrong tack, the sail's going to eat itself up on the mast and on the other track. So what I do instead is I carry a spare main, which is a total pain in the butt because it's a huge sail and I'm always trying to keep space in the boat for people. But yeah, but losing the main, and I always keep a pretty, even though we have a solid bang, I keep a pretty robust topping lift, boom topping lifts that I know would double as a spare main halyard if we lost the main halyard. So the idea of being able to have some kind of storm main or main up after you lose one is a really good one. I've just never been able to really figure out trysails very well.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too.
yeah. I understand for sure.
What do you have for running rigging?
So it's a combination of things. You know, I think I have some Dyneema halyards. I think you have to use Dyneema, or they call it over here Spectra, judiciously. You know, sometimes you want the stretch. Nathan and I were just talking yesterday about, he felt like he ripped one of the reefing system, one of the blocks in his reefing system off because he had a Dyneema reefing line in his first reef, and there's no give. You know, I think having a little bit of expansion in your lines can be really important in heavy weather. It's not always just about having things as tight and neat as they can be in moderate weather. So my halyards are Viper, which is a cord line, but still got a little bit of stretch to it. The sheets are Stayset X. I have a Dyneema main halyard. And
straight Dyneema?
No, it's covered.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I have the running backstays are ducks, you know, that kind of straight Dyneema, and they tail off to a Spectra covered line, and so we use the runners religiously with the staysail. But yeah, nothing overly high tech on that for sure, but stay on top of it. And I carry a bunch of spares. We chafed the main halyard on the running backstay fitting on this last trip. In fact, it was a drag because it was an expensive halyard. So yeah, you need to have spares. You know, for me, keeping the boat sailing is the critical thing. I can always pull out a spare sheet or halyard. For this summer, knowing we were going to be way off the grid, I have spare pumps and windlass parts, and it's all is loaded down. We're sailing a little sluggishly from all the parts, but yeah. So, and then standard 1x19 rig with staylock fittings that we do ourselves, and Furlex head sail and staysail furling. I've had really good luck with that. It's made by Selden. I've had lots of them over the years. We had Harkin for a while, but I really like the Furlex. So, any more questions, guys? I might roll out of here. It's late on my side of the world. Really nice to see you all.
We got one more question here. Hold on.
All right.
Hold on, John. One more question.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh,
Go ahead.
what did you say? What anchors do you use?
Good question. So I am a great believer in the spade style anchor, and in particular, I have a spade. It's made in New Zealand. I have two. I upped my. It's the one I have now is 80 pounds, which is actually a little too big. It's always about 35,000 all loaded up. For years, I had a 20 kilo or 66 pound spade, which is just fantastic. But by spade, you know, they have a pointy tip, a big blade, and an arched shank. And so they're so much better in my view than the plow style anchors. The plow style anchors carry the day for so long, but it's all in the name. You know, plow anchors plow, spade anchors dig. So between the Mantis, the Supreme, the Ultimate, the actual real spade, I really think upgrading to a spade style anchor is a huge plus. I mean, our problem is getting the damn thing up more than it is worrying about dragging. And that's a good problem to have. So I have two spades, a 66 and an 80. I have a Fortress, and buried deep in my bilge, I have an old Luke 3-piece, 115-pound storm anchor that I wonder if I could get all the bits and pieces of it together. I have so much confidence in those spades that I haven't looked at it in a while.
Good. So you say spade, so you're talking about the Ultimate. I'm thinking Rockna versus the Ultimate. Is that the same?
So there's actually, Jack, there's Rockna, there's the Ultimate, and then there's spade itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and the spade is kind of distinctive because the head of it is painted yellow. If you've ever seen that on a boat, not really, you know, supposedly so you can see it down there. They're super expensive. I mean, that 80-pound spade was $2,000, but it's, I think, money well spent. Yeah. So do you guys know the website Attainable Adventure Cruising?
Yes.
John Harry's up in.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So he's a really big proponent of the spade. And when I say the spade, that particular model, and he talked me into it, and it's some of the best advice I've ever gotten. But the Rockna is equally great. There's no roll bar on the spade. And the Supreme and the Ultimate, that whole style of anchor is just so much better. So I think they just, you know, the design, they dig when they load up as opposed to plow back. And then we have
quick question.
Yeah.
How much road do you have, if you have any road, or do you use all chain, and how much chain do you use?
Okay, great question. So one of the design flaws of Quetzal is she has a really crappy chain locker. For a big boat, she has a little external chain locker that's on deck, so you can't get the chain very low in the boat. And I have been loath to put a fitting in there to lower it deeper into the boat, because I know it's going to leak, and it's going to leak in the V-berth, and that's going to really piss off my wife. And so I've made a different solution. I buy really great small chain. I have G7 chain or G70. It's super high tensile chain. It's only 5/16. I carry a lot of it. I carry 250 feet of it, but it's a small pile of chain, being 5/16 for a boat my size. But it has the tensile strength of greater than, say, 3/8 BBB. And it's a lot more manageable. And then I also carry 250 feet of road. So one thing about sailing in the north, you're often anchoring in 50, 60, 70 feet. So you need to get a bunch of road out there of overall scope to have any scope. So yeah, so we rarely go beyond our chain, but I definitely have enough road to let a lot more out. And we have a really cool snubber that we use. And I use two snubbers. I'm a massive believer that you got to have a snubber when you set the anchor. And in fact, sometimes when it's so deep and I can let out 270 feet and I'm on 20 feet of road, it's kind of a relief, because then you don't need the snubber, because the road basically does the same thing.
Well, John, I'd like to thank you for your wonderful presentation this evening.
Thanks, Chris.
I will say that
Can I quickly ask what kind of snubber you have?
Yeah, it's one I made up myself, Jack.
Okay.
You know, that Mantis snubber though is awesome. The one
Okay.
thing I don't like about it is they have carabiners. I like to be able to, I'm always thinking about getting unanchored in an emergency as well as getting really well anchored. So I have these very cool chain hooks that you can find in the Caribbean. You can buy them through Island Water World or Budget Marine, and they're just great. They hold really well, but they can be released quickly. So it's similar to that Mantis bridle style, but it's one I made up myself with 3-strand nylon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, thank you, John. I will say I've seen a few presentations here, but I've never seen as many icebergs in one presentation as we've seen with you. And I know that we actually have a gentleman here that's planning a trip, and I think some people will be inclined to reach out to you, and I've got your contact info. So if people are inclined to go even more crazy than what we normally do here, I'll make sure to be able to get in touch with you. But thank you so much for your presentation and taking time out of your trip out in Spain to meet with us. So
No, my
again,
pleasure, guys.
thank
Thanks a
you,
lot.
and
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
terrific.
good luck at avoiding the orcas tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll chime in from the Canaries. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Appreciate it. I'm gonna hit the
Bye-bye.
sack.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.